Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to take 1 second of your time to tell you about something before we move on to tonight's story. This coming weekend, that is to say June 21st through the 23rd, I will be at the Greater Philadelphia Expo Center in Oaks, Pennsylvania at Too Many Games. Pretty sure you guys have seen that a lot. There's a whole bunch of YouTubers that usually come to Too Many Games. I've gone there for a couple of years in the past, actually, and I'm going back again. So, if any of you guys want to hang out at Too Many Games, if any of you guys want to play games at Too Many Games, and also I'll be doing a couple of my game shows and a few horror story panels. I would really love to see you guys there. Seriously, it means a lot to me every time I get a chance to actually meet you guys in person. So, that's it. That's the only announcement, and I'm sorry for taking up your time. On to tonight's story.
It's gonna take forever to get there in the snow.
That was the first remark I heard about the event. Aside from the basics: place, fire type, potential casualty estimate. For those interested, the answers were Silverstream Forest off RR7. Unknown and unknown. We're in the middle of a once-in-a-century snowstorm. Those once-in-a-century snowstorms that seem to come every 5 years now. Doesn't mean much to some, but for those of us who have to work and drive in them to save lives, it matters. That night, it mattered. Our station is the only one in the area. Under ideal conditions, the rural Route 7 connection to the forest would be a 35-minute drive. We'd be lucky if we got there in 90. An hour into the drive, we saw the aurora. Despite the howling wind blowing heaps of snow through the air, I'd guess the visibility was less than 10 feet. But the aurora was clear.
Electrical,
John posited.
Not sure how that'd work, someone answered. Sounded like Lloyd.
No, I agree.
No, John agreed.
Me neither.
I looked out the side window toward the direction of the light show. It wasn't like the kind I'd seen when I spent time in Iceland after college. Nothing like that. These ribbons of light were thin, fast-moving. Red, too. All shades of red, from deep crimson to something that neared orange. Definitely not the Borealis, I said, mostly to myself. John got on the radio and asked dispatch if there was any new information. They were still working on it.
There's nothing but woods and houses out there as far as I know, Andy said. Nothing that'd be causing anything like that. Maybe a meth lab, Lloyd suggested.
I doubt it, John said. But I can't think of anything else.
The radio crackled. Jenny from dispatch. Looks like a plane might have gone down. Ted Davis from the airport over in Lovis says that he was tracking something for a few minutes before it went off the radar. Said it disappeared right around where our first call came in. He didn't see any transponder info on the airplane, so probably military. Hope you guys are ready for company. Jenny laughed as she told us this last part. I think all of us rolled our eyes. We'd had to deal with accidents that resulted from going-ons at the military base before. Lots of dick swinging from military folks about jurisdiction and procedure and all that. Nothing any of us wanted to deal with.
Thanks, Jenny,
John answered.
Let us know when you get anything else. Oh, and try to call over the base. I know they usually don't answer, but if they're already heading over there, we can be ready for the whole situation.
Okay, Jenny radioed. At that moment, we were a little more than halfway to the site.
Who called this in anyway?
Andy asked. A homeowner, I said. Remember a couple years ago when there were those protests about the company cutting down some quote-unquote sacred Indian forest?
Oh yeah, is that where this is?
Yeah, company put a housing complex for long-term contractors who work on the base. About 100 units, looks like the fire's near there.
So why are we the only ones going through this shit show of a storm, and the military guys could be dealing with it?
I don't know what to tell you, man. We rode in silence for a little while. Snow gouting from the sky in dense, heavy flakes. And the lights of the truck combined with a strange atmospheric light show. The flakes were an eerie dark pink. Lloyd spoke up.
If this is a military aircraft, there's definitely going to be a hazmat situation. God knows the kind of shit they have on those things.
I nodded. And we've dealt with the hazmats more times than I can count.
I think I see something,
John announced, pointing. The rest of us squeezed together and looked. The telltale orange glow of fire was visible in the distance, filtered through the thick, gauzy flakes.
Where are we exactly? Andy said to himself, looking at the GPS. A few seconds later, Jesus, we're still miles from where the call came in. Either Jenny was off with the location or the fire is a fucking monster. If we could see it through this much snow.
All right, we're at the top of a hill looking down in the valley, John said, squinting into the road. That development Erica was talking about is right in the middle around here, he pointed. Since the fire's there, he moved his finger to the left, it looks like the plane missed most of the units. Anyway, by the time we get there, I think the storm will have done a lot of the firefighting for us.
Hey guys, Jenny's voice came through the radio. Come in.
Go ahead.
The military said they have no flight scheduled for tonight because of the weather. Well, that's a plus. Lloyd came back from the back. I wasn't in the mood to deal with those assholes. Jenny continued. They also said that we shouldn't respond to the fire. The four of us all muttered our own versions of what the fuck are they talking about. John clicked the talk button on the radio.
Jenny, what do you mean don't respond?
They didn't say. Just that they'll handle the cleanup when the weather clears.
When the weather clears? Didn't a plane crash into a bunch of fucking houses?
That's what it looks like. And I've gotten more calls from homeowners in the complex. It's burning hard. You're going to have multiple casualties. I called over to Hewitt and James counties to see if they sent over their own units. Both can, but it's going to be a while before they get there. You guys are flying solo for a while. Do your best.
Any word on hazmats from the callers?
I asked, but couldn't get a straight answer. Proceed in the way you think is best.
How about the captain? Did you get him?
Yeah, I got his wife on the cell phone, and she woke him up. He's the one who said proceed in the way you think is best.
Yeah. Fine. Thanks, Jenny.
No problem. You boys stay safe out there.
Okay,
I announced as we turned off the main road in the rural route. The housing complex was close. The orange light from the fire began to overtake the shine of our lights on the cab of the truck. Breathers on, full hazmat protocol in effect, etc., etc. You guys know what to do. People first, fire second. Andy, find a good triage point and set up the medical stuff. John, Lloyd, and I will...
What the fucking Christ is that?
John interrupted. The truck slowed as he applied the brakes, its heavy tire chains chewing into the snow. What? I asked.
That,
John said, pointing at the power pylon on the side of the road. We peered through the windshield. I don't see any... Andy started. And then he stopped. He saw it. Then the rest of us did. Something was draped over the top of the pylon. It glistened in the flickering light of the fire. I couldn't make sense out of it. Let's go, I told John. We need to get in there. John resumed driving, but the four of us craned our necks as we passed by the pylon to figure out what it was that we were looking at. No luck. A few minutes later, we arrived at the complex. Wow, Lloyd muttered. That must have been quite a fire. That was an understatement. In the time that it had taken us to drive there, it looked like the worst of the flames had burned out. The majority of the western quarter of the housing complex had been leveled. Small, isolated fires still licked at the parts of the structure still standing, however, flickering and burning out under the onslaught of snow. The firewalls separating the units seemed to have worked pretty hard. Why isn't there anyone outside? Andy asked, and gestured to the building on the other side of the parking lot that looked like a recreation center. There's no footprints going over there. Probably got filled in by the snow, Lloyd said. But I don't see any lights in there either. Looks like there's still part of the building still standing on the far west side of the complex, I said, squinting at the structure through the snow. We'll start there looking for casualties. I don't know how much longer that part can remain standing, and I don't want anyone who survived having the building fall down around them. Andy, do your triage center at the rec place across the street. We'll take anyone we find still alive over there. The rest of you, let's go. Lloyd, John, and I, donning the rest of our equipment, trudged through the snow in the direction of the west part of the complex. I still can't make out what that wing of the building looked like before it burned, Lloyd said. His voice was clear in our helmet radios. I don't know if what's still standing is the stairway or an elevator column or what. Yeah, I responded slowly, staring with curiosity at the structural piece jutting out from the charred ground and debris. Where is everyone? John wondered. We were 100 feet from the remains of the structure. There was much less snow to walk through here since the fire had melted most of it. It was icy, though, and the three of us struggled to walk over the treacherous terrain in our heavy gear.
"Andy, has anyone come to you?" I asked over the radio.
"No," he radioed back. "I haven't seen a soul."
"I'm gonna drop the light here," Lloyd said, and placed a powerful construction lamp on the ice, pointing them at the skeletal remains of the building. I couldn't help but notice how silent the scene was. Above us, the last of the aurora that had been with us blinked out. Lloyd flipped the switch of the lights. Bright white beams blasted the charred side of the structure. My eyes widened.
"Well, that's different," John whispered over the radio.
Neither Lloyd nor I replied. The three of us stared at the structure in front of us. It wasn't any building at all. Not one that I'd ever seen. It was wedge-shaped, maybe 50 feet high, and covered in mounds that reminded me of metal that had melted and left to cool. It jutted from the ground almost as if it had been shoved into the dirt.
"Guys?"
Lloyd asked, and gestured. A blackened body lay face up, a dozen or so feet away from the wedge.
"Another one," I informed, pointing. "And there. And there."
All in all, it looked like 20 bodies, all charred beyond recognition, were strewn around the site.
"Can we get up that thing?" John asked.
I don't think we can," I replied, studying the smooth topography of the wedge.
"Maybe if we could get up there," John suggested,
pointing at the hole in its side.
"Do you think the ladder will reach?"
"Probably not. Closest place we can bring the truck is over there, and I doubt that'll be close enough. Let's do a quick check around the area for any survivors, then move on to the less damaged parts." "Hey, Andy, if no one's coming to you and you're done setting up, start knocking on doors. And Jenny, can you hear me from the helmet, or is it not working again?" "I read you," Jenny chirped. "Can you get call routing to give you the phone numbers of the people who called this thing in and call them back? We've got no one out here, not a soul." "Pretty spooky," Jenny radioed. "I just got a call from the county. There's supposed to be a few hundred folks living there by now." "A few hundred?" Andy radioed from the other side of the complex. He sounded bewildered. "I got nobody here. No one's answered doors, and you guys saw when we came in. The parking lot's full." "We'll be in touch," I told Jenny, ending our conversation. Then to the guys, "We'll start going door to door with Andy interrupted me on the radio. "I need you guys to come here now, like right now, to the truck." There was something in his voice that froze my blood. He sounded small, frightened. Andy Dross, the Marine medic, who served before he joined the department with us. "We're coming, Andy," I said, and the three of us turned and headed toward him. "There's someone there with him," Lloyd called. Thank God, I thought. Someone who can tell us what happened here. Andy was standing with his back to the truck. He wasn't moving. He just stared at the person in front of him. As we got closer, it looked like the person was another man, around Andy's height. He didn't look burned, at least from the back, and he was dressed in pajamas despite the driving snow. "Sir, are you okay?" I began walking up to them and standing beside Andy. The man's face was missing. Everything from his forehead to his chin was gone. I could see the inside of his brainless skull from top to bottom, ear to ear. There was no dripping blood, no clumps of gore, just a wet, gaping hole. "What the?" Lloyd gasped. He came out of the building," Andy said, jerking his chin in the direction of the building behind us. "And it tapped me on the shoulder. He hasn't moved since then." I turned around. Footsteps in the snow led from the doorway to where the man stood. John shone his flashlight into the man's skull, light reflecting wetly within the cavity. Andy reached out and touched the man's shoulder. He waited for a moment, then pushed. The man resisted the shove, balancing himself on steady legs. "Hey, folks!" A voice came over our helmets. The four of us jumped a mile. It was Jenny. "Find anyone out there? Any survivors?" I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't think so." Okay, well, I talked to the guy in call routing, and he said that he couldn't get an ID on the numbers that reported the plane crash.
It was a full minute before anyone responded. We couldn't stop staring at the survivor. I eventually spoke up. Were the numbers blocked?
No,
Jenny said.
he told me that calls came from a utility extension, like the ones technicians use when they test the phone lines from the pole.
Utility extension, I parroted, thinking.
The man with the hole in his face twitched violently.
Jenny, we have to go, I muttered.
Okay.
I heard her radio click off. What's he doing? Andy asked, as if we'd have any idea.
Look at that!
John exclaimed, and shone the flashlight at the top of the survivor's missing forehead. A string of slime, as thin as just a few hairs, was extruding from the space between his skull and scalp. As we watched, it stretched out and over the truck toward the road where we came in. Phlegmy, guttural noises came from his throat, accompanied by blood and other fluids leaking down his shirt. He took a step. And another. Holy fuck, Andy muttered. It wasn't because of what the rest of us were looking at. His eyes were elsewhere. I followed his gaze. The doors of the remaining housing units were open. Their doorways were crowded with human shapes. One by one, thin filaments of slime oozed through the air in the direction of where our survivors had gone. The scene, once silent save for the wind, was filled with that same terrible guttural sound. People began walking out of the buildings, walking by us, walking down the driveway. All their faces were gaping holes. My knees wobbled and I felt my stomach drop.
What do we do? Lloyd whispered. I think we should leave, I suggested. It was more of a plea.
We need to see where they're going, Andy declared. We can't leave yet. I hated Andy right then. I despised him. I despised myself because I wouldn't fight. I'd just go along.
Okay, John agreed. We stay back and we follow them in the truck.
Yeah, Andy said, hopping into the driver's seat. Come on, leave everything where it is. We piled into the truck and waited as over 100 people left their homes, then followed the slow, plodding succession of their faceless bodies.
Where do you think they're going?
John asked, nobody in particular.
I think I know, I answered. And I did.
The pylon we passed on the way in was surrounded by hundreds we'd followed. Their empty faces were tilted upward like baby birds. The string of slime connected to something up high, something we could still barely see. Can the truck lights swivel that high? Andy asked me.
I think so, he said. And I manipulated the mechanism, aiming the bright searchlights on the side of the truck up the side of the pylon.
The thing we glimpsed on our way in was still there, still glistening, but in the harsh lights from our truck we could see it was red and blotchy and streaked with blue veins like a massive disembodied organ.
Oh my God, Lloyd choked.
The hundreds of gray slimy filaments connected the survivors to it, but another different thing connected the creature to a metal box at the base of the pylon. It was thick and red and tubular. It pulsed in slow, regular intervals.
That's the phone box from the complex, John said.
He said something else, but I wasn't listening. All I could think was what Jenny had radioed. He told me the calls came from a utility extension like the ones technicians use when they test the phone lines from the poles.
Drive, I demanded.
Andy, fucking drive! He didn't do anything for a minute. He just stared at the non-faces of the survivors, which no longer tilted towards the thing perched atop the pylon, but instead pointed in our direction, all of them. I could feel the cold wetness of their hollow cavities deep in my chest. Drive! I demanded. I screamed. This time Andy obeyed. The truck skidded for 2 eternal seconds in the deep snow, but then lurched forward. We raced down the rural Route 7 and turned onto the main road, back towards the firehouse. I don't believe what we just saw, Lloyd demanded. What happened? That didn't happen, right? I don't know what happened, Andy said, but something did. The truck sped down the road. We didn't say another thing for a while.
Why were they looking at us at the end? John asked, breaking the quiet. They wanted us, I guess.
That's got to be why that thing made those calls to dispatch. More people, or something.
John nodded. More silence. The radio beeped.
Go ahead, Jenny,
Andy said. He sounded exhausted. Jenny sounded annoyed.
Hey, you guys still at the scene? The dispatchers from Hewitt and Jane County says their crews arrived a little while ago but couldn't get them on the radios. And I'm still getting calls from that utility extension about the fire.
Andy looked at me, his eyes wide with horror.
I picked up the radio and I clicked it on. Jenny? Don't answer calls from that number anymore and see if anyone at the base will be around to talk when we get back. Wait, so you're not there? Jenny asked. There was bewilderment in her voice. Did you leave in the middle of the Just call the base. I told her, I'll talk to them when I get back.
With that, we continued our long drive back to the firehouse in silence. Just the crunch of the snow under our tires, and the roar of the diesel engine, and every so often a voice whispering in the back of our minds. A voice asking us to turn around and come back. We didn't listen.
Hey there, kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you for listening to tonight's video, and quite potentially tomorrow night's or last night's video, depending on how many times I've reused this recording. I especially want to give a big thanks to Erik Mary, John, Daniel Poulsen, Trace Miles, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Wayne Milstead, Frederick LaRue, Ken LAndo Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Nicholas Saeid Alyain, Tyler Ramberg, Asia, Gabrielle baca, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sandy Barney, Melissa Siegwart, Chompski, Daniel Rowe, TheGingerBroz, Andreas, Solvik, and Andrew Steinberg. You guys and everybody who is supporting on Patreon are the real MVPs. And if anyone would like to join them, you can always check me out at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Or if you'd just like to support the show without, Patreon, then honestly, every view or minute or however you watch or listen to this Creepypasta Storytime on the YouTube live stream or here on YouTube, the podcast on Amazon, Google Play, and on Spotify. And if you'd like to support my wife, then there's nothing better than listening to scary stories with some Dungeons & Dragons themed herbal teas. Etsy.com/IvoryMonocleTea. Alright, kids. Thanks so much for listening. And sweet dreams. Hey there, kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to take 1 second of your time to tell you about something before we move on to tonight's story. This coming weekend, that is to say June 21st through the 23rd, I will be at the Greater Philadelphia Expo Center in Oaks, Pennsylvania, at Too Many Games. Pretty sure you guys have seen that a lot. There's a whole bunch of YouTubers that usually come to Too Many Games. I've gone there for a couple of years in the past, actually, and I'm going back again. So, if any of you guys want to hang out at Too Many Games, if any of you guys want to play games at Too Many Games, and also I'll be doing a couple of my game shows and a few horror story panels. I would really love to see you guys there. Seriously, it means a lot to me every time I get a chance to actually meet you guys in person. So, that's it. That's the only announcement, and I'm sorry for taking up your time. On to tonight's story. Nothing scares me. I live for adventure, the unknown, the undiscovered, and the sweet rush of adrenaline that courses through my veins every time I stare smiling into the very face of death and give Give him the finger. I've hunted grizzlies in the Alaskan wilderness armed with nothing but a bow to give my apex predator prey a fair shot at winning. I scaled Yosemite El Capitan mountain, all 3,000 feet of its vertical rock face, in just 24 hours while sleeping in suspended hammocks. I hung from the pitons I wedged into the rock. I survived sandstorms in the Sahara and a mid-Atlantic hurricane as I sailed from Newfoundland to Portugal alone in my wind-propelled sailboat. I always travel alone. I refuse Sherpas, guides, or whatever else of the like. They ruin the experience, so I pay them to look the other way. I'm also incredibly lucky. Not just with near-death close calls, which God knows there's been more than a few, but with life in general. I'm 23 years old, and in the prime of my life, I've never had to work a day of it, because I come from a ridiculous amount of wealth. My family owns one of the largest retail chains in North America, and money is no object for us. My father says he and his father before him worked all their lives building an empire so the future descendants of our family wouldn't have to. My ancestors hail from Portugal, and my father says the blood of discovery and conquest runs through our veins. I tend to agree with that because I suffer from a serious case of wanderlust. If I stay too long in a city with all its creature comforts, modern utilities, and domesticated people, I end up feeling like a caged animal in a concrete zoo. My family has always understood my particular affliction, so they've encouraged and funded every single one of my expeditions on the sole condition that I document everything on my satellite phone, which connects me to the internet and is how I'm able to write this to you now. The whole reason I traversed the Atlantic in the first place was to reconnect with my heritage, stopping only on Portugal's offshore land, the Azores, along the way to resupply. I wanted to walk the same land that my ancestors did, travel the same waters, feel the same sense of accomplishment. So I retraced their steps. This mimicry has led me all over the world, and finally, to the Amazon and Portugal's largest former colony, Brazil. It's hard to imagine in our modern era that there remains places left on the planet to be discovered, let alone something as colossal as the Amazon. But here she stands, 5.5 million square kilometers in all her glory, just begging to be explored. To put that into perspective, that's larger than all of the territory controlled by the Roman Empire at its peak. Rome at that time stretched from as far west as the Atlantic coast in the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, and as far east to the sands of Iran in Western Asia. All that territory, including Roman coastal North Africa, would fit comfortably within the Amazon, with over 1 million square kilometers to spare. To this day, there lives dozens, if not hundreds, of tribes of indigenous people who remain uncontacted. If I had found one of them, it would have been the highlight of my entire life. Hell, if I had found some new species of frog, I would have been content, and I don't even much like frogs. So if someone would have told me a week ago that I would have been the first to set eyes on a structure in the middle of the jungle that's remained untouched for God knows how long, I'd have been elated. It's been said that more tears have been shed over answered prayers than unanswered ones. When I found it, I was able to cut my exhibition short and make my way back to civilization. I had provisioned for weeks, but by the 4th day, I'd already had enough. The Amazon is the most relentless and unforgiving terrain I'd ever encountered, which is probably a pretty good reason why it's remained largely unmapped. The air's so thick here with humidity that you cough up the water that accumulates in your lungs throughout the day, as if you're drowning, one breath of fresh air at a time. When the air itself is wet, so is everything else. And if you're not careful, the very ground you walk on, firm and steady with one step, will swallow your leg to the ankle with the next, and will hold on tight with shackles of mud as dense and dark as clay. Insects are more of a concern here than anywhere else in the world that I've encountered, and I don't just mean the large venomous kind like spiders or centipedes. These creatures are deadly. A single bite from either would likely spell the end of my life out here with no medical attention. They have no reason to bite you. They don't see you as prey and actively go out of their way to avoid you. The mosquitoes are an obvious choice because they're everywhere. They loom in the air like fog, and every single one of them carry the risk of sickness or infection. They buzz in your ear in that startling way that causes you to jolt and slap hard at your skin that would hardly matters because every single one of them that you just kill is waiting to be replaced by hundreds others. All the stagnant water here is ideal for their procreation, and the putrid smell of that bacteria is overwhelming and hangs heavy in the air alongside them. Zika, dengue fever, malaria, and Lord knows what else is a concern, of course, but I've taken the appropriate precautions and vaccinations before coming here. I expected them. I didn't expect the goddamn ants. I swear, I've never given the insect a second thought in my life until I got here. Hundreds of different types of the most aggressive, vicious, hostile little assholes I've ever had the displeasure of encountering. You can hardly stand idle without them swarming the hand that rests on a tree, or them claiming your backpack where you left it on the ground to stretch your aching back. Red ants, army ants, bullet ants, each one more terrible than the last. My heart nearly stopped completely when one of the latter found its way into my boot through an opening where my pant leg untucked. A sting from one of those, and the victim can only wait it out and writhe in agony on the ground as it builds and crescendos over the course of several hours. That's what I've been told anyway. I have no interest to find out for myself. Another thing that cannot be ignored is the noise. Well, you'll find no stillness here. Every square foot of this jungle is teeming with life and commotion. The insects buzz near constant, and the birds screech at all hours, and the monkeys howl at your presence. I get the same feeling of agitation here as I do in the big city without any ounce of concrete in sight. Noise was the final straw that nearly drove me from the rainforest. But it was also noise that kept me from leaving. More specifically, a sound, seemingly out of nowhere, completely out of place, as much felt as it was heard. A comforting, rounded vibrato in the sharp, screeching symphony of the jungle. A deep, pulsing hum that reverberated through the ground, beckoning me to its source. Hypnotic to the extent that I followed without question. I remember cutting through thick brush and vine to get there. I remember walking with my backpack above my head as I crossed my body of murky water. I remember the hum increasing in intensity. I don't remember it taking a full day to make it there. My watch read midday before I heard the hum, but the sun had already begun to set when I stood before the structure. I didn't register much at the time. The noise led me to a ravine, and at the base of that ravine stood stone gates. I could hear nothing else over the noise. Less a hum now, more a roar that drowned out the jungle that increased in intensity with every step I took toward it. The rumble so overwhelming that I was forced to block my ears as I drew nearer. As abruptly as it began, it all at once stopped. When I stood directly in front of it. The speed and sudden change in intensity caused me to lose my balance for a moment, and with its silence, the familiar sounds of the Amazon were once again audible. When I removed my hands from where they had rested over my ears. Birds, breeze, running water, all of it. I observed my discovery in awe. Massive twin slabs of stone, standing side by side almost seamlessly, and held up by enormous primitive hinges. Locked only by a massive wooden log, resting horizontally on iron brackets, creating a door bolt. I whispered something inaudible, even to myself, and looked around me. The walls on either side and behind the door ran incredibly high, and the tree roots and vines that grew dense out of them blocked out most of the setting sun. A small creek ran behind my feet, and I followed its stream with my eyes to where it ran under the small gap beneath the stone, thinking that the water must feed into an underground cave blocked only by the gate. Watermarks and algae covered its base, formed by the rising and falling levels of the creek throughout the years. Letting my eyes travel all the way to the top, I noticed something that I hadn't before. Words. 6 of them, 3 carved into each stone slab. Abandone toda esperanza con entaraki. My Portuguese was rusty, but I instantly recognized it as a warning. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth, and before I knew it, I was laughing. Hysterically, I threw my head back and let out a tremendous cry of triumph. I had discovered something. If the conquistadors of the old world thought it necessary to build a structure like this, out in the middle of nowhere, to discourage entry, then whatever lie beyond it will surely land me on the cover of National Geographic. I lifted one end of the massive log with all my strength and allowed it to crash at my feet. Then made my way to the opposite end to repeat the process. I dragged the log as far away from the stone as I could. The hinges screamed as they moved for the first time in centuries, and I screamed with them from the exertion it took to move them. When the door was ajar, I stood before them, doubled over and panting, watching as the sweat from my face dripped into the stream and flowed into the entrance. I gazed into it, shaking my head and squinting at the light. For all things I was expecting to lie beyond the door, a valley was not among them. Daylight had already faded into blackness behind me, but before me, within the entrance, a glow emitted like obstructed moonlight. I straightened, walking right up to it, and breathed deeply as I passed its threshold. The breath I drew was refreshingly free from humidity, clean and somewhat cool. The moon overhead was indeed obstructed, and its light shone brightly in tandem with the constellations that littered the heavens. Hundreds, if not thousands, of yellow fireflies scattered about the landscape, mimicking the shimmering stars with soft bioluminescence. The reflection of the moon on the rushing water of the creek was sparkling in competition, all this creating the most breathtaking, beautiful scene I'd ever had the pleasure of witnessing. The valley was vast, but its borders were visible. It's 50 or 60 acres guarded by mountainous walls on all sides like a crater. I walked, mouth open at the wonder of all of it. Everything here seemed out of place for South America. The climate, the trees, bloody grass, all of it. What I found exactly, I still wasn't sure. A different ecosystem that seemed to have evolved independently from, yet still deep within the rainforest. I named it Eden, because I thought Paradise Found would make a hell of a headline. I walked around the valley, taking in the majesty of this place, the cool breeze on my skin, the sweetness of the air, until I finally removed my gear from my aching shoulders and lay it on the bank of the creek, sprawling myself out next to it, on the cool grass, gazing up at the spectacular night sky, grinning. For the first night since I stepped foot on this godforsaken place, I drifted off to sleep deeply and uninterrupted. I awoke to nothing. No squawking parrots, no buzzing insects, no noise, only the comforting sound of the creek filled the air as I made a silent prayer to anyone listening for that. The sun shined merrily in the blue sky, so I took this opportunity to retrieve my solar panel from my backpack to charge my phone. I took in my surroundings for the first time in the light of day to appreciate the stunning array of color this Eden offered. From the vivid evergreen pasture on the ground to the crystal blue of the sky, and everything in between was magnificently vibrant. I felt safe here. Began documenting my discovery, jotting down my findings in the leather journal I packed, and snapped pictures for references. I don't know exactly what that feeling of security began to wane throughout the morning, but I do remember it was the sound of my breathing that alerted me to the fact that I could hear nothing else. No birds or insects still, but even the creek was now silent. The hair on the back of my neck stood at the realization that no pin drop can be heard should one fall anywhere in this valley. I dropped my gear and I made my way to the outer walls where the gate stood, scaling the hill that stood between us. I was at the peak when I was able to see past the cliffs of the wall above me. My eyes shifted from the crystal blue of the sky above me to the deep blackness that began to swallow it whole from the peripherals. I rubbed my eyes at this, but it didn't seem to help. Above me in a large circle was the sky, and I'd always known it, but in a larger ring around it was blackness. I say blackness, but it hardly does it justice. Night is black, but night is something. What surrounded the sky was more than black. It was nothing. I looked back at the bank of the creek where I spent the night and realized why I could no longer hear water. Because there was none left of it to speak of. The very ground it ran over was left cracked and dry. A new color was introduced to the palette of the valley. Brown. The plant life so vibrant and alive just that morning, it began to wilt and dry before my very eyes as if they were plagued by drought. Confusion set in my eyes as I scanned the walls of the gate, and panic took its place when they found it closed. I bolted towards it, whispering "no" under my breath, repeating and begun screaming it as I pushed with all of my might against the slabs that refused to give an inch. I paced as my mind ran through my options. If I couldn't go through the gate, I could at least scale the walls. These were nothing in comparison to El Capitan. I ran back to where I dropped my gear and pulled out what I needed for the ascent. By the time I made it back, it was too late. The blackness that consumed the sky above me now consumed the walls before me, taking the gate with it. I stood there for a long while, staring into the abyss, shaking my head in an attempt to wake up from this nightmare until I realized that meant the blackness was still moving. I made a line in the dirt with my foot to confirm it and watched in horror as inch by inch it was swallowed up by the shadows. I jogged around the perimeter looking for the opening I'd never find, my heart sinking at the realization that the void was closing in from all directions like a cylinder or a noose. All I could do was retreat towards the center as it stalked forward. Confusion, panic, frustration, and anticipation flooded through me like an adrenaline until I was almost quite literally pulling out my own hair. Minutes grew into hours, and I howled into the abyss in defiance. But it offered no echo as a reply. The rocks I hurled into it were swallowed whole, with no sound or sign of them landing. No way under. No way over. No way out. I made my way back to my gear and sat beside it, head in hands, powerlessness. A completely foreign concept to me. The grass beneath me cracked like dry leaves under my weight as I opened my bag to retrieve my canteen. My camera fell from where it was nestled within it, illuminating the rear LCD screen in the tumble. The image of the last picture I took filled its display as I felt my brow furrow. As I leaned over to pick it up, I struggled to comprehend what it was that I was seeing. In the place of the lush green forestry that I had photographed was a picture of smoke. I hit the left keypad to scroll back through my other shots, and the next dozen or so were the same. I checked the timestamps to make sure that they were, in fact, the same photos that I had taken earlier to confirm. Embers were introduced as I continued to scroll, and slowly they grew stronger into flame with every click of the button, my heart pounding in my throat until abruptly the screen went from inferno to black. Another hit of the button, yet another black screen. I checked the numbering at the top right. It read 600 of 757, another click. The monitor remained black, but 600 fell to 599. It was the 546th shot when I saw it. 2 yellow specks of light in the distance of the photo. The next 5 clicks brought them slowly closer, then 5 that followed after that introduced more pairs of yellow light under the screen. It was shimmering as if taken a picture of that clear night sky. It was only as the original pair grew ever closer to my camera that I registered. I was looking at eyes. Thousands of pairs of them, scattered everywhere, watching me from all angles of the darkness, and waves of chill ran through my body as I remembered my first night here. Firefly. The final click of my button turned my screen a bright yellow altogether, as if one of the eyes were pressed up close against the lens. I squinted at the brightness, realizing for the first time just how dark my surroundings were becoming. I looked up and all I could do was watch as bit by bit the blackness eclipsed the sun above me. The light growing fainter until altogether I was plunged into darkness. been 19 hours since then, and my phone's battery reads 2% at the end of my typing. There's no sun left from my solar panel to source. I fear this is going to be my final words. I watch as my leather journal burns in the fire that I'd made to ward off the cold. I observe as the light it emits is absorbed by the void no bigger at this point than my own arm's span. The hum I heard first in the Amazon comes and goes louder than ever, making it difficult to think. What happens when it closes? I can't be sure. As I pulled out another object from my bag to burn, an ant from the Amazon ran from where it was taking refuge within it. And the sight of another living creature filled me with more joy than I could put into words. I tried to make him stay. I tried to prevent him from scurrying off into the blackness, throwing myself on the ground, stretching my hand out to catch him. I failed. I couldn't help but weep like a child at this abandonment. Just a day ago, I wished death on every single one of them that resided in the jungle, and now I'd give anything to be kept company by one. To not have to face this alone. 1%. To my family, take care of each other. I love you all more than anything, and I'm sorry that I can't... that I'm forced to leave you. Dad, I promised you that I would never let you outlive a child. Forgive me. Don't come looking for me. Don't come looking for it. I found something out here in the jungle. What it is, I don't know, but I've heard it said that hell is a culmination of everything that you feared most. And as I stare into the nothingness that surrounds me, I can't help but laugh out loud because there's not a goddamn thing in this world that I'm afraid of. But nothing. Nothing. Nothing scares me. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you for listening to tonight's video, and quite potentially tomorrow night's or last night's video, depending on how many times I've reused this recording. I especially want to give a big thanks to Erik Mary, John, Daniel Poulsen, Trace Miles, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Wayne Milstead, Frederick LaRue, Ken LAndo Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Nicholas Saeid Alyain, Tyler Ramberg, Asia, Gabrielle baca, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sandy Barney, Melissa Siegwart, Chompski, Daniel Rowe, TheGingerBroz, Andreas, Solvik, and Andrew Steinberg. You guys and everybody who is supporting on Patreon are the real MVPs. And if anyone would like to join them, you can always check me out at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Or if you'd just like to support the show without, Patreon, then honestly, every view or minute or however you watch or listen to this Creepypasta Storytime on the YouTube livestream or here on YouTube, the podcast on Amazon, Google Play, and on Spotify. And if you'd like to support my wife, then there's nothing better than listening to scary stories with some Dungeons & Dragons themed herbal teas. Etsy.com/ivorymonocletea. Alright kids, thanks so much for listening, and sweet dreams.